we're just going to start at the beginning with some acknowledgements and firstly to welcome you to this In Conversation. We have one each month, and we're delighted to be talking today about commissioning research differently and talking to some of those who've been involved to date in our research program. If we move to the next slide, we're keen to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all working on, paying our respects to ancestors and elders past and present. I'm actually on the Mulwinina land in Hobart today, which is exciting to be, and I'm sure that people will be coming from across the country, obviously from different Aboriginal lands. We would like to take this time also to identify and confirm that the National Centre is committed to ensuring that voices of those whose lives are affected by the decisions that governments make should fundamentally inform those decisions. We think that First Nations voices must be heard, raised and amplified through a voice to Parliament. It's time for genuine and significant reform to progress healing through the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And we're supporting a yes vote. We also want to honour the lived and living expertise of all victims and survivors of child sexual abuse. We recognise that there are children and young people today who are experiencing sexual abuse and dedicate ourselves, all of us, to doing all we can to promote their effective protection and care. And can I say that I'm in Tasmania, where there's been the release of the Commission of Inquiry and some incredibly brave and courageous victims and survivors who've been speaking out, keen to see the change and the protection of children in the future. And I'd just like to acknowledge their courage. Thank you. We also want to note that during these conversations, issues can come up that people might want to get some further support for. And those are the numbers that we'd encourage you to record and keep so that you can access support if you need during the conversation or afterwards. Thanks, Laura. So just very briefly, if you don't know who we are a National Centre partnership with founding members from the Australian Childhood Foundation, Blue Nut Foundation and the Healing Foundation. We're coming up to being around 2 years old, and the National Centre was a recommendation of the Royal Commission, the national one, into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. And our intent is to elevate the voices of victims and survivors of all ages, life stages and communities, and include them in all the ways that we do our work. And we trust that you'll hear how we've done that through the commissioning of research to date. We have an online child sexual abuse webinar next month. We're excited to be joined by Professor Michael Salter and Ms. Carol Todd to talk with us next month about the complexities and the impacts of online child sexual abuse. And we'd encourage you to register for that one. It'll be on October the 19th at 2. All righty, so here we are, this exciting panel of people that we're keen to hear from. Our session's recorded, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll see if we can get to them. But I can tell you now that we don't get to all of them. So we'll do our very best to make sure that the panel can respond to the questions that you have. And as I said, the purpose of the conversation today is to explore the National Centre's commissioned research program. We're keen for you to hear about how we went about the process, what we learned, how can it be applied, what we're thinking about our future commissioning processes. And we're just delighted to have a set of speakers with us today. And I'd just like to introduce them to you now, and then we'll get into a conversation with them. So first is Professor Andrea de Silva. She's our research director at the National Centre now. She's an experienced applied research professional, knowledge generator and thought leader with 20 years experience across diverse areas of public health prevention, social justice and inequality. She's led research teams in top-tier universities and previously held roles as research director in several Victorian public sector organisations. She's got a big, long list of publications, and she's an adjunct professor at Monash University. So welcome, Andrea. Dr. Amy Webster is with us. She's the Manager of Policy, Advocacy and Research at Sexual Assault Services Victoria. It's a new peak body for specialist sexual assault and harmful sexual behaviour services. She's a researcher, writer and evaluator with a PhD in Government Community Sector Relations. In 2018, Amy led the design and establishment of Victoria's new dedicated sexual and reproductive health information service, 1800 My Options. And she's a project lead for one of our projects, commissioned and funded through the National Centre. And her work will be on delivering trauma-informed support for child sexual abuse victims in Victoria, mapping the knowledge gaps and training needs of the specialist sectors. We're also delighted to have Associate Professor Lynne McPherson with us. She specialises in social work at the Faculty of Health at Southern Cross University. She's the Director of Research for the Centre of Excellence in Therapeutic Care, a division of the Australian Childhood Foundation. And she's the Deputy Director of the Centre for Children and Young People at Southern Cross University. Lynne is also a commissioned researcher from the National Centre with the project leadership of Listen Up, learning from victims and survivors about what helps disclosure and responses to child sexual abuse. Welcome to Jamie Sorby, who is a Kamilaroi woman and serves as a member of the National Centre's First Nations College. Jamie was a peer assessor in the 2022 competitive grants round, and she's a lecturer with the University of South Australia. And it's fabulous to have you, Jamie. Thank you. And Alex Shriane is the Manager for Research and Evaluation at the National Centre. She has a background in social and health science research, as well as in clinical practice as a psychologist and a paramedic. Alex is completing her PhD in behavioural sleep interventions, and she's passionate about using research to improve the lives and well-being of marginalised or underrepresented populations. And we're going to start with Alex. Alex, I'll hand over to you and ask you to provide an overview of the commissioned grants process and how we went about it, and then we'll open a discussion with the panel. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm going to use some slides to illustrate the things I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I think that an important place to start in terms of talking about our commissioning process and our subsequent body of commissioned research is a quick sort of background as to why we commissioned research, why we ran a grants round. So as Leanne mentioned, the Royal Commission provided a series of recommendations, one of which led to the standing up of the National Centre, but they also speak about the need to build the evidence base in child sexual abuse in Australia. And at the National Centre, we've operationalised that recommendation to commission research to directly address the challenges that we're all about addressing. And the way that we go about addressing those challenges, the way that we go about commissioning that research is very much led by our vision and purpose. So our vision at the National Centre is a future without child sexual abuse. And in achieving that vision, we need to have a very robust, multidisciplinary, up-to-date evidence base. And commissioning research is one way to achieve that. But we also wanted to lean on our purpose, which is disrupting the dynamics that contribute to child sexual abuse occurring. And I think that speaks to that theme of doing things a little bit differently, not necessarily commissioning research in the ways that it traditionally is, and making sure we were really tailoring this process to fit the space that we're working in. So if we look at the National Centres for Research objectives, as I mentioned, we start with keeping up to date with the evidence base, ensuring that that evidence base is up to date and robust. And part of that is commissioning high quality research and evaluations. But it's also about supporting the adoption of continuous improvement practices. And that speaks to the continuum of research that the National Centre considers. So we, of course, have, academic, university-led research, but we also have those quality improvement and evaluation practices which sit on that continuum of research. All research, however, must be supported to achieve effective translation and dissemination. So building the evidence base is one part of that puzzle, but then ensuring that we're translating the findings of that research to make it meaningful and accessible to end users is another really important part. And then finally, we complete that cycle by always reviewing the evidence base to identify gaps or any areas that we need to address further, and then repeating that cycle. So in standing up our grants round, the National Centre wanted to offer Category 1 funding. Any academics or anyone associated with universities will know that it's the most attractive form of funding, but it is also the most competitive to secure. And to be a Category 1 funder, the National Centre had to ensure that our grants round was nationally competitive, but that it was also advertised very widely across Australia. Our funding could only be used for research purposes, so it couldn't be used for things like service delivery. And we had to demonstrate very clearly defined assessment and selection criteria. The funding also could only be provided directly to the individual or the organisation conducting the research. So we offered 2 streams that people could apply for in our grants round. The first stream, our research stream, is probably what you may more traditionally associate with the grants round. So any individual or organisation in Australia could apply through that stream if they had the capacity to conduct research. And those projects could be any type of research as long as it was into child sexual abuse and it was aligned with the National Centre challenges. We offered up to $250,000 funding for each of those projects and no specific project support. Quality improvement stream was the second stream, and it is one of those points of differences for our grants round. So that one was really targeted at practitioners, service managers and service delivery organisations in Australia that have a focus on working with victims and survivors of child sexual abuse. Those were for evaluation, implementation or quality improvement projects, and we offered up to $35,000 for those projects. They are also entitled to National Centre support in terms of the standing up and execution of their projects, as well as the translation and dissemination of their findings. And we accepted applications under both streams between October and December of 2022. In applying for funding through the National Centre, applicants were asked to demonstrate how their project would align with our 5 research principles. And these research principles are also what formed the basis of our selection and assessment criteria. So projects needed to demonstrate how they were going to be truly collaborative. So we wanted to see multidisciplinary project teams. We wanted to see end users embedded throughout the life of the project. They also had to be development, trauma and healing informed, as well as inclusive and culturally safe. All projects needed to be rigorous, ethical and transparent. So for your more traditional academic-led projects, obviously that was achieved through ethics committee review. For your quality improvement and evaluation projects, we wanted to see how they were going to have organisational governance oversight and how they had still considered those ethical components of the project. And as I mentioned, all projects needed to be relevant and translational. So we really wanted to see how the translation of findings was embedded into the project, how outcomes would be meaningful and accessible to end users. So when applications were received by the National Centre, they went through a bit of a tiered assessment process, and each of these tiers had very clear objectives. So all applications started with the National Centre research team. We conducted a minimum criteria assessment. So was the application completed in full? Were the researchers based in Australia? Those sorts of things. Applications were then passed through to our peer assessment panels. Our peer assessors were really the crux of our assessment. They did the bulk of the assessment work. They were an absolute strength of this process. And as I mentioned, they completed assessment against those predefined selection criteria that really lent on those 5 research principles that I just spoke about. They were also responsible for ranking applications for funding, and applications that they did recommend for funding were passed through to the National Centre Board. Our board was responsible for ensuring that the projects we would fund are aligned with the purpose and priorities of our organisation. And then a final list of projects we wanted to fund went through to the Department of Social Services. Their oversight was to ensure that funding those projects wouldn't breach any of our existing contractual obligations. I would like to speak a little bit about our peer assessment process because, as I mentioned, it's really a strength, very much a key tenet of the way that we ran this grants round, and I think speaks to the strength of our outcomes. So our peer assessors are not just multidisciplinary, that they come from a range of professional backgrounds, but also multidimensional. And what we mean by that is that people bring more than just their qualifications, more than their professional experience to these roles. They also bring a vast breadth of lived experience. And for many of our peer assessors, that was lived experience of child sexual abuse. So we recruited 40 peer assessors from around Australia to sit across 7 peer assessment panels. And we recruited people in 4 kind of broad cohorts. So we had people with lived and living experience of child sexual abuse, researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. And those 4 groups we feel represent the really key end users of this research. These are the people that are going to be accessing and implementing the findings, so they deserve a voice in who we choose to fund and how we go about doing that. It is worth noting, though, that our peer assessors more often than not would wear more than one hat. So we had peer assessors with lived and living experience of child sexual abuse who also had extensive research backgrounds. We had peer assessors who were working in policymaking roles, but they also have a background as a practitioner. So again, I think that really speaks to that sort of multidisciplinary and multidimensional approach that we were looking for. So as I mentioned, we had 7 peer assessment panels, and those panels were constructed to focus on certain themes. So when we received applications, we teased out what the main theme of the project was and then allocated it to a panel. As you can see there, we did have 2 panels with the same theme, responses for adult victims and survivors. And that really just speaks to the sheer number of projects that were focusing on that particular research area. But as you can see, we had 5 other panels that spanned quite a breadth of topics. So as I mentioned, peer assessors were recruited and then allocated to those panels. Depending on the panel they were in, they would receive between 5 to 8 applications to review, and they had 4 weeks to conduct their individual assessment before coming back together at a group panel meeting. In that interim period, in that 4-week period while they were conducting their assessment, we did offer optional information sessions. And those information sessions provided a bit of an overview about how to conduct assessment, what was going to happen at the panel meeting. And we held one general session, which was open to all peer assessors. And then we did offer an information session specifically for our peer assessors with lived and living experience of child sexual abuse. And the reason why we offered that is because we wanted to have a conversation about how you straddle those 2 worlds. How do you bring that personal experience as well as all of their professional experience and all of their broader experiences in life and distill that into reviewing this research. So those peer assessment panel meetings where everyone came back together, they went for 2 to 3 hours, depending on the number of applications that they needed to review. They were facilitated by our then Director of Research, Associate Professor Dominic Coates, and I provided secretariat support for those meetings. They were a place for people to share their individual feedback, but also hear the individual feedback of other peer assessors and have a bit of a conversation about the individual projects. And then as a group, they ranked applications for funding. So we had 3 rankings: highly recommended for funding, where there was unanimous support from the group; not recommended for funding, where we had more than a few people saying they had some concerns about the project; and then recommended for funding was when maybe only one person had some sort of outstanding queries or concerns. The recommended and highly recommended projects were the ones that went through to the National Centre Board. So if we look at outcomes in terms of the flow of assessments across, flow of applications rather, assessed across that assessment period, we received 49 applications altogether. 1 was removed at that initial minimum criteria assessment. So we had 48 applications go through to our peer assessment panels. They put forth 20 applications that were recommended or highly recommended for funding to the National Centre Board, who finalised 18 projects that they thought were appropriate for funding, and all 18 of those projects were approved by the Department of Social Services. So that leaves us with our initial body of commissioned research. 13 of those projects came through our research stream and 5 through our quality improvement stream. It totals $2.99 million worth of research, and dependent on project aims and methodology, projects are running anywhere between sort of 12 to 36 months. The orange dots on the screen there represent our project lead sites. and the green dots are our project partner sites. And we are cognizant of the fact that this initial body of commissioned research is quite sort of Southern Australia, capital city centric. So future commissioning efforts and future research efforts will certainly be looking at more rural and remote research, as well as accessing more Northern Australia sites. This is a very brief overview of the topics or the themes that are being addressed through this body of commissioned research. I would love to talk you through all 18 projects in detail, but we would probably need more than the hour we have together today. I would encourage you to jump onto the National Centre website though, because we do have individual pages for each of our projects that provide an overview of the team, as well as the aims of the project. But this is just a very high level overview of the sort of themes that are being addressed. If we overlay this with our 7 challenges here at the National Centre, we can see this really beautiful complex web of how our body of commissioned research is going into addressing those challenges. And I really think that speaks to the strength of the peer assessment process, the broader assessment process, and then this subsequent body of research. So that is a very, very quick overview of our 2022 competitive grants round and our subsequent body of commissioned research. Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks, Alex. Good job. Very speedy, lots of work, but encapsulated in a few slides there. Lovely work. Thank you. I just might start now with Andrea, who came in at the end of this process, or as it was up and running, to get a sense from you, Andrea, about what we're hoping to achieve through the process, what we want to have that comes out of it for the National Centre, and then but most importantly for the sector and for people living with a history and the impact of child sexual abuse.
Thanks, Leanne, and hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on the panel. I think Alex has done a fantastic job of introducing everyone to the commissioned research program, and I think what we aim to get out of it really is highlighted by the diagram Alex showed around the panels, the assessment panels, and really it highlights the National Centre's unique position between policy, practice, research, and those with lived and living experience. And this is a process that really brought that to life. What we're trying to get out of this program is research to fill existing evidence gaps around our program of work around prevention, healing, recovery of victims and survivors of child sexual abuse, in which there are many, many evidence gaps. And we can use this program of research to direct our attention to where we really need to focus in subsequent rounds. And it also allows us to build in translatable, implementable and sustainable outcomes right from the beginning, so that the input of those multidimensional and different types of professions and end users into the process allows them to be asking those questions and think about how would we use that, why would we use it, why would we do it this way, right from the outset. And so that's a real strength of the program.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think people might like to hear now about a couple of the projects. So I might go first to Lynne and then to Amy to ask you to tell us a bit about the projects that have been funded and and how and your how you think your projects are going to benefit victims and survivors.
Okay, thanks, Leanne. So the title of the project that we're absolutely privileged to lead is, as you've heard, Listen Up, learning from victims and survivors about what helps disclosure and responses to disclosure of child sexual abuse. And it's a real team effort. Before I talk about the project itself, we've teamed up with La Trobe University, we're Southern Cross University, Centre for Children and Young People, and we have research partner as an industry partner, Centre Against Violence. But our wider team, the team surrounding us, are first and foremost young adults with lived experience of child sexual abuse, and the design is that they will walk alongside us as we craft every stage of the project. And then I'm doing hand signals because I think of it in terms of concentric circles. So the wider advisory body, the Research Advisory Group, is comprised very much of experts in the field and people with lived experience. So a lovely mix of a group, of an advisory group. So that's who we are, without going through a list of who's who in any greater detail. The problem identification we talk about in research, and there are a whole lot of ways to come at disclosure, But we were so mindful of the recent child maltreatment study and just this issue of prevalence, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys. I mean, really contemplating that and looking at other research that talks about prevalence. And we were struck by this one figure, 30 times greater. So self-reports made anonymously, safely to a researcher, but not resulting in safety, telling someone about what happened, were up to 30 times more than official figures. Just get your head around that. What does that mean for those huge numbers of children and young people who either haven't told or haven't been heard when they tried to tell? What does that mean for their safety and well-being? What does that mean for in terms of ongoing safety and well-being? So it really led us to a focus on disclosure. And the question that we've really landed on is one around what enables children and young people to disclose and what gets in the way, and what kind of responses to disclosure are most helpful when children and young people try to, you talked about courage and bravery before, Leanne, when children and young people are brave enough to start to try to talk. And I say start to try to because one of the other things we already know is that disclosure is most often a process. It's not a one-off event. It's not a full, now I've told and I don't need to say anymore or anything else. It can be a process that can be one step forward and one step back. And so our research is really keen to learn more about the intricacies of that process, some of the details of that process. So we're going to hear from victims and survivors. We're going to hear from at least 50 in individual in-depth interviews. We're going to run focus groups and invite the people around victims and survivors, family members, community members, professionals who work with them. Then we're going to, on the basis of what we've learned, craft a survey, a detailed survey that we'll be distributing far and wide to help us learn about an association between what was helpful and ongoing wellbeing and recovery. So we're really excited and privileged to be involved in this project. And I think you can gather I could talk all day about it, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Lynne. That's fantastic. And we'll come back to you about the process for the commissioning of the research and your thoughts on that. But it'd be great to hear from you, Amy, about your project and tell us a bit about it and what difference you think it's going to make.
Thanks, Leanne. That was really interesting, Lynne. As has been said, I'm Amy Webster. I'm from Sexual Assault Services Victoria, and it is great to be part of the panel today. I'm joining from Wurundjeri Lands in Naarm or Melbourne, and I wanted to congratulate the National Centre for commissioning this round of research. The project that I am leading and am involved in for SASVIC is quite different from Lynne's. So we applied under the practitioner-led quality improvement stream. And our project designs and really leverages SASVIC's role as the new peak body for 18 specialist sexual assault and harmful sexual behaviour services across Victoria. And so we wanted to, or this funding round enabled us to gather evidence about the gaps in practitioner knowledge, skills and qualifications, specifically related to child sexual abuse. And then really excitingly, we're able to rapidly use these insights to design and implement a range of targeted child sexual abuse focused workforce capability building type activities, yet to be defined because it's a genuine research process and we haven't collected all our data yet, but informed by and delivered directly to the specialist workforce across Victoria. We're also looking at identifying opportunities to embed trauma-informed curricula and other specialist knowledge and skills into key broader qualification pathways, and we're already hearing a lot of interesting ideas from practitioners on that. Our overall goal is, of course, improving trauma-informed and compassionate responses to survivors of child sexual abuse, and to build the specialist workforce, their capacity and confidence in doing that really specialist work. it's been a really important opportunity for us because it's provided a pathway for really practical research, quality improvement focused research that we didn't see any other way of funding. And equally importantly, it enabled a dedicated focus on child sexual abuse that we may not have otherwise been able to resource. So those are a couple of reasons why this has been, important to SASPIC, and it's been great to be part of this round.
Oops. Thanks, Amy, very much. It's exciting to hear about how useful what's relatively small amount of funding can be leveraged in quality improvement and workforce agenda that you have there. I'm actually going to jump to Jamie because in talking about, and the aim of this session was to tell you about our process and the strengths of our process. As Alex said earlier, the role of the peer assessors in going through in detail these applications and determining and making recommendations and determining which ones should be funded. The peer assessors and those with lived experience in particular were incredibly important. So, Jamie, tell us about what you thought of the process on reflection.
Okay. Thank you again for having me today on the panel. I'm speaking to you from over Ghana land, over South Australia way, so we are kind of all over the country, aren't we? I suppose my experience from the research was, I was a little bit unsure in the beginning about what my role would look like and feel like. However, I throw myself into things sometimes. And but I think from the very beginning of saying yes, I had all the support I needed. I just literally had to reach out, and Alex was always there via email for me as well whenever I needed, which was fantastic. So the initial experience was, I felt very supported. I got direction on what to anticipate, what to expect, and what was kind of asked of me. Then the process of looking over the different research applications again, I consulted with Alex again just to get that reassurance I'm doing the right thing, and using my lens of both lived experience and as a First Nations person, and sort of dipping in and out of both, but then also combining them at the same time through I suppose a kind of a unique lens specific to this type of research. I felt like during the process it was very open, transparent. Everyone was open to hearing what everybody had to say within the panels as well. And I think that allowed me to really express my feelings and my thoughts on different research applications and things like that, which some of them were absolutely fantastic. And I think there was elements of it as well, reading through that on your own and within the panel, that at times were triggering, and knowing that you had people there that, were there when you needed it was really reassuring and helped me get through that process. So thank you everyone that was involved in that as well. And just reminding yourself of your own self-care after, we're all working in this workforce, or we have lived experiences and things like that. So self-care is really important as well.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for your reflections and for your participation in the process. Lynne, you've probably come across a few grants processes in your life. Can you tell us what was unique about this one?
Thanks, Leanne. It was unique, full stop. It absolutely was. I think overall there was this real congruence between what the centre, who the centre say they are in terms of the values and the priorities, and the way that the centre conducted this entire process was so congruent. So to include requirements like we needed to think about and write about being trauma informed and how we were going to respond to that in our processes, in our research processes. We've never read anything like that before in a research grant application. So to have to do that fits with who you are. And it was a fantastic challenge. But the even greater challenge in terms of being unique for me was just the diversity of the selectors. And so what that meant for me as an applicant was that we had to, as a team, really challenge ourselves about our design, our use of language. Were we getting this right? Were we accessible? Were we making sense to someone who didn't know secret academic theoretical language? And there's no need to know that to make these judgments. But were we showing rigor for those who do know that secret language and want to read about it? So yeah, I think it was a fantastic challenge to have to work through, and will serve us well when we get to dissemination, when we get to our findings and we want to talk with people about this is what we did and this is what we think it means.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful. And I will just remind people who are listening that you're most welcome to send in your own questions if you have them for Lynne, Jamie, Amy, or Andrea, or Alex, of course, about the process. But thanks, Lynne. Amy, did you find it a unique process too as a grants process? Were there things that stood out for you as well?
Yeah, there were a few things. So first and foremost, the practitioner-led quality improvement opportunity. So rare, really greatly appreciated, really gives organisations and practitioners who are doing this work every day the opportunity to, have their expertise recognised and heard and translated into really meaningful applications quickly. So that's great that existed. Also, what was great about the process is we had a number of conversations going back and forth with the National Centre about how to get the balance that Alex was talking about earlier right in terms of ethical, trauma-informed approaches to work within the proportionate to the project that we were undertaking. And so we had some robust, really interesting conversations to tweak our project, and we did make changes in the design based on those conversations, but they were really open and respectful, and the National Centre took the time with us to do that. That was great. Also want to just recognise the templates were really good, and sounds probably really dull, but to a lot of us researchers out there, we don't want to spend as much time filling out progress report templates as we do want to do the actual research. And so really appreciated the templates and how practical they were and how they allow us to focus on the doing part of the work. And I just have to mention a shout out to Alex, who has been a constant contact point for SASVIC, always encouraging, expert. That's been a really great, we were only not even halfway through the project, but it's been a great start to have that support.
Thanks, Amy. I think the moral of the story is everyone needs an Alex. There is a couple of questions coming through, so that's great. Keep those questions coming through. I'm just going to go to Andrea and just ask her from her point of view, coming in towards the end, what did you notice about the unique nature of the approach that the National Centre designed for this commissioning?
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I think one of the really useful aspects is that the team did an evaluation of the process as well. So not only did they do a unique process, but they also evaluated it. So we are also interested in continuous improvement for our own purposes. And, there's some really good learnings from that, and meeting with the researchers when I started my role, and to hear from them about how it worked. And I think one of the key learnings is that it was done really well, and actually the National Centre needs to keep doing what it did, and what we're doing in this webinar, disseminate the learnings from it, that it is quite unique, that the process did work well. There's always areas of refinement, but the broad range of peer assessors was really unique, and really did lead to a really useful outcome in terms of what it's going to build across the evidence base. We did learn around, what a lot of us know, but until it happens in practice, is around timeframes, how long it takes for these things to for the whole process to run end to end. For example, Alex stopped describing the process at when the department approved the selection, but actually there's a whole lot of work after that around the contracting and the IP clauses and all those other parts that need to take place as well. So I think it was really, amazingly well planned, lots of great vision in how it was set up. The evaluation gives us areas to refine and build on to continuously improve what we're doing, but it's really solid foundation and really strong basis to continue with our commissioning program.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm going to just jump to Alex with a question that's come through the chat around how were those who were not successful, and there was lots of those, how were they engaged with?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I think it's another one of those sorts of points of difference, or something we tried to do a little bit differently. So, we commissioned 18 projects, but we had 31 that were unsuccessful. And we were very deliberate in the way that we communicated with those projects. So we did advise them by email that they had been unsuccessful, but we encouraged them to have a meeting with us via Teams to discuss the feedback so that they could understand why they were unsuccessful, that they could seek clarification on the feedback, and that they could, usually the vast majority of the time, research projects aren't dead in the water because you don't get one grant application. You will go and seek funding elsewhere. So we wanted to work with people to learn how they could improve their application and that they could be successful in funding their research elsewhere. Those offers of those meetings were taken up by the vast majority of unsuccessful applicants, and those conversations were really enlightening, and they were a two-way street because we got to seek feedback on the process, on what it was like applying for funding, and it's also proven to help us forge some ongoing relationships with researchers separate to our grants round. So I would strongly encourage that option if funders do have that, because I think it's a bit more humanistic than just receiving you were unsuccessful email and you don't get any feedback and you don't know why. So I think that was something that worked really well for us.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, okay. Hopefully that answered the question. There's been another question in the chat around, is there research, obviously not in this work, but is there research focused on those who commit child sexual abuse and the healing and prevention that they need? Who'd like to answer that one? There is, of course, research. Andrea, do you want to answer that?
Thank you. Yes, Leanne. There is research in that space. There's, international research, some in Australia. It's not the focus of the research that we are commissioning and undertaking here at the National Centre, but we we are aware one of the things we are looking at is actually how we maintain or collect the, whether it's through a register or some kind of portal, to get over a more holistic picture of what research is actually occurring across this landscape, so that we can utilize that evidence base more quickly. So that's one of the things we are looking at, actually, and there's really good examples out of the UK where there's a really complete picture of the nature of the research that's occurring across these different aspects of child sexual abuse.
Thanks, Andrea. There's a question around the honorarium process with the victims and survivors being involved, and what conclusions or reflections we might have about how that worked and any changes. So I might just start first with Jamie. There was a process there around payment for your time. Did you think that process worked okay?
Yes. Yep. I think it was nice. It was nice to be paid for your time.
Yeah.
I didn't 100% anticipate that was going to happen in the first instance. I think I wasn't thinking about that aspect per se. I was more thinking about the experience and the knowledge or impact I might be able to bring. I think that's where I was coming from. But yeah, on a side note, it was a lovely surprise of what I thought it was really nice to be paid for that time, and I did feel like my time and effort was appreciated. So yeah.
Thank you. And we have we have some victim and survivor advisors through our colleges. And so as a result of this, this piece of work, we also then decided to update our paid participation policy and ensure that we had a kind of like an equal approach to people providing time to us, whoever they were, so experts as with lived experience or experts in other ways. And so we certainly started to, we used the experience of that, and we developed a whole of National Centre policy to address and I guess to get an equal playing field, so that everybody was seen to be valued in that way, because we do actually value everyone in that way. And there's a question here about where can we learn about future funding? Will there be an annual round? I might start that one myself, which is that as part of the contract for the National Centre, which is a 5-year contract with the Commonwealth, there was a component of that funding that we were required to commission out into research. And that was around $3.5 million. So what we've already committed is $3 million. So there is some funding there for us to consider going forward. We also have had some feedback about what gaps have emerged, including, as you would have seen on the map, about you know, the rural and regional areas that are not necessarily represented, plus some gaps around and crucially this week, people with disability and their experiences of child sexual abuse, culturally and linguistically diverse groups, those from the LGBTIQA plus community, and so on. So there are areas where there are priority populations where we may need to do something different in order to create better access to funding. So we might be thinking a bit differently about it going forward. But I'd also get Andrea to comment on that in terms of future rounds and future research commissioning.
Thanks, Leanne. Yeah, absolutely. There are some gaps in what we've commissioned and also what we're seeing in the evidence base. So trying to support those projects that you just described in those priority groups. Plus also I'll put a plug in for, we are doing a community attitude study soon, which will allow us to identify other areas that we might need to do further research into, because of areas that we need to explore deeper or differently. So I think we need to think about how we get the research that we need to drive the change that we want and the action that we want. So thinking about what we want to do, and that might be more practitioner-led research, more evaluations around what's happening in practice. So to actually strengthen the evidence base based on what services, systems, sectors are doing, for example, to address the needs of victims and survivors living with a disability, or from particular cultural groups, or with language barriers, so that we can, instead of commissioning academic research that has to go through a much longer pipeline, we can look at what's happening in practice and work out, you know, evaluative research around what works for who, why, how much is the cost, how sustainable it is, so we can drive that area of the evidence base quicker.
Thanks, Andrea. I guess the other thing to say is that we have a pretty strong commitment to identify gaps and issues with the victim survivor community. And so whilst there's some research gaps, there might also be some knowledge gaps that come from the lived experience knowledge that we would like to keep front and center in our thinking. So this is an ongoing process. And where can you find out? You can get a newsletter. You can go online and get our newsletter, which is a monthly one, and in which all of our latest endeavours are listed. So do encourage you to go to our website and join up with that. There's a question here about the possibility of, let me just get it back up again, the possibility to produce materials for other research commissioning organisations. So this is a question about how we can help others develop. And I might actually go to Lynne and Amy about that, starting with you, Lynne. Now, how can we help other research commissioning organisations, do you think?
So I should probably declare about now that I was both an applicant and I was a peer assessor
Right.
And clearly I didn't assess my own application or have any role in that. So because the lens I bring to this experience or to this question is that of an assessor. So I think some of the learnings are being disseminated without even trying. For example, I went back to the Faculty of Health at my university and I shared at a faculty meeting this really innovative approach to grant applications and grant assessment. And people in the faculty were pretty excited and they see this as the way of the future, so much so that they've started to develop learning materials and professional development opportunities for applicants who are developing or likely to develop grant applications involving people with lived experience assessing them. So that was a pretty convoluted way to say, I think it's happening already.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yes, thanks, Lynne. Amy, what about you? What do you think we could be doing to help other research commissioning organisations?
Well, I don't think I've ever been a research commissioning organisation. I've always more been an applicant, but I think that there are a lot of things that it would be good for research commissioning organisations to think about. And that involves, some of the things around, the application process, lived experience, things that people have talked about already. But I also think that research commissioning organisations, particularly those that focus on any form of sexual violence, are totally necessarily and appropriately concerned about ethical considerations and trauma-informed approaches. Absolutely appropriate, and we need to keep strengthening that. But I think that making that, what we mean by those things, a little bit less opaque and a little bit more practical could help on both ends for people to design research projects and for funders to feel really confident that they have taken the right approach. This is actually learning not from this research project, but from another one that I'm involved in, which has involved a focus on engaging people with cognitive disabilities. And, going through a formal ethics process in that case, there were so many concerns about the risks of engaging with people with cognitive disabilities on sensitive subject matter that it almost became, it's too hard to do research with these people. And I think that that's a real problem. We shouldn't get to that point. So I guess making that, practical, doable, obviously safe and appropriate as well. Both sides of the equation could maybe do that, work on that.
That's really helpful, Amy. I think you're probably singing the same tune as Andrea would be about this, and I might go to her in terms of what you think we can do around this issue around ethics and trauma.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I think that's definitely something we need to lean into and have really robust discussions around, because as we're going around meeting with all of our commissioned research project leads, there's a lot of discussion around ethics approval, how victims and survivors are viewed by ethics committees, whose job is it to protect them, but also we need to, our role is also to make sure that the research is safe, is trauma informed, is doing all the things that we want it to do, so that it is a program and a body of evidence that we will stand behind. So there's tensions there. There's lack of understanding, understanding of capacity, capability, and roles. So I think there is definitely work to be done, and we are talking about potentially bringing together as a community of practice the research leads and the research projects to talk about issues like this that emerge, and consider how best to shift some of the thinking and address some of the barriers that projects and individuals and institutions are facing to ensure that we're building the evidence base and maximising the investment in these research projects.
Thank you. I might come to Jamie and ask her, if this all goes to plan, what do you think is going to be what we learn as a community from all of this research? What are you looking forward to?
That's a big question.
Yeah. That's why I started with you.
Thanks. I think if I can just build on a little bit there with what Andrea was saying too, I think coming from the lived experience lens as well, I know safety is paramount, 100%, trauma informed, yes. But we've got to be able to share our stories too. And we've got to have that platform, and, you know, we can be as risk adverse as we like, but at the same time, you know, how do we work around those barriers so people can still share their stories? So I suppose what I would like to see come of this is more awareness, more understanding, more dissolving of these stigmas around this topic, and this having these conversations with people. And I think what you were speaking about before, Lynne, you know, like there's so many people out there that don't have the opportunity to speak up. And if research is one of these ways that we have a mass of people coming forward and having that opportunity to speak up and relieve some of that burden they're carrying, then, I mean, what more could we ask for as the centre than to create that opportunity for people?
Thanks, Jamie. See, you were the right person to ask about.
Oh, thanks.
I guess the challenge for us now is to think about how, you know, how we share what we learn, and what each of the individual projects learn, but also the process. And that's really what we're doing today. That's the beginning of what we're doing today. And I will just go back to you, Lynne. I think that in your application process and in the process of finalising the grant, you needed to be clear about how the information would be disseminated and shared, and how the National Centre would be able to do that with you. Could you talk a bit about that? Because we really want people to know that this is not research for research's sake. This is research for change.
That was absolutely a requirement that you had of us, and it was a good requirement, and forced us also not just to look at language, but to look at action, and how are our actions useful, relevant to the field, relevant to the frontline practitioners, and most critically relevant to children and young people who may have experienced child sexual abuse. So we got advice from the team and the team around the team that I've already talked about. And the kind of stuff that we said was, we'll do the traditional because that's what academics expect. And it's also actually how we formally build knowledge, how we say this knowledge has been ethically and rigorously developed. So we'll do the traditional dissemination, which means publishing in manuscripts, but won't be any manuscript. They'll be publishing manuscripts in journals. Sorry, I'm getting myself a little bit tongue-tied. There'll be journals, because you require this too, that are what we call open access. So I don't need to have $1 million contract with a library to access it. Anybody can access them with a link anytime. Much more importantly, the kind of dissemination we talked about, or the products or the outputs, were things like blogs, videos, you know, things that young people will see on social media. I won't even dare to try and name what social media for obvious reasons. A whole suite of learning and development tools, things like this, webinars. So we're going to be going far and wide in contemporary ways and old-fashioned ways, and the old-fashioned ways will be designed to be accessible, to be able to be accessed by people. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, thank you. And I see that we've come to time, and I think that much as I'm sure everyone has something to add, I think we need to call time on this conversation. Can I thank the panel wholeheartedly for their time today, for their thoughts and reflections, for their encouragement of the work, and also that if we had time, we would have gone into the list of things we want to do better next time, and we'll certainly take feedback from those who are watching, but also people who have been engaged in this process about how we could do it better going forward. And And I'd encourage you very much to respond to our questionnaire about how you found this webinar, what things you'd like to learn from it, and like us to learn from it, I mean, and how you'd like us to keep designing these webinars to make them as effective and as useful as possible for you. Again, can I please thank Andrea, Jamie, Lynne, Amy, and Alex for participating today and for sharing their work, and all the best with the research, folks. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. See you next time, folks.